The gentle yellow glow from the bedside lamp painted delicate lines on the ceiling, weaving through the shadows that lingered in the room. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the roof served to calm the heavy stillness, yet it failed to drown out the quickened pulse of Evelyn Parker's heart. In the heart of her studio, she stood, her gaze locked onto the incomplete portrait that awaited her touch, the paintbrush quivering delicately in her grasp. A depiction of a man unfolded before the viewer's eyes. His face remained a canvas, hazy and poised for the finishing strokes. Yet the eyes, they were crafted with such precision, vibrant and intense, as if they could penetrate the very essence of anyone bold enough to lock onto their stare. Evelyn swallowed hard, the burden of unease pressing against her chest like a leaden stone. She was unaware of the reason behind her choice to paint those eyes, yet their familiarity struck her immediately. Those were the eyes she had glimpsed in a brief, haunting instant when Lucas Brooks first entered her home. She felt a jolt of surprise as the sound of footsteps echoed behind her, prompting her to whirl around. The studio door let out a soft creak as it opened, revealing him, nonchalantly leaning against the frame. His gaze remained tranquil and unwavering, yet there was an elusive sharpness in his eyes that she found difficult to articulate. "I had no idea you were fond of painting portraits," he remarked, his voice rich and velvety, echoing softly in the quiet of the room. Evelyn paused before replying. She composed herself, placing the brush gently on the palette before turning away, deliberately evading his gaze. "It's merely one of the numerous projects I'm engaged in," she responded, her voice grittier than she had meant it to be. Without a moment's pause, Lucas crossed the threshold. He paused before the painting, his gaze lingering on each nuance of the unfinished visage. Those eyes. He inclined his head, a subtle smile dancing at the corners of his mouth. "They appear to be known to me. Who might it be?" A shiver coursed through Evelyn, igniting a sense of unease within her. "Just an idea," she remarked, her voice sharp, revealing the strain she sought to conceal. Lucas pivoted to meet her eyes, his stare intense, as if he could penetrate the delicate curtain of her speech. "Simply a thought." He arched an eyebrow, the weight of his disbelief unmistakable. "Or an acquaintance from your past." The atmosphere hung suspended, as if the very essence of time had come to a standstill. Evelyn sensed herself coming apart, the barrier she had meticulously constructed around her dissolving beneath his gaze. With a swift motion, she pivoted to depart, a sense of urgency propelling her forward. Yet, just as she was about to move away, Lucas's voice cut through the air once more. His voice flowed with a measured cadence, each word weighed and imbued with a disquieting command. "You know," he began, "I don't typically forget the eyes of those I've encountered. And these eyes." He hesitated, a subtle yet captivating smile gracing his lips. "They belong to me, don't they?" His words flowed through the air, a wave breaking against Evelyn's delicate barriers. She remained frozen, her heart racing with such intensity that its rhythm reverberated in her ears. Outside, a thunderous roar echoed, succeeded by a flash of lightning that pierced the darkness, casting a stark glow across the room and heightening the electric tension in the air. Evelyn pivoted, her eyes meeting his in a moment she could no longer escape. "Lucas," she whispered, the name slipping softly from her lips. Yet, it bore no hint of reproach. It stood as a recognition, a silent reality she was not prepared to face. Yet within his gaze, she perceived neither judgment nor condemnation. Only patience lingered, intertwined with an unspoken depth, a presence she hesitated to define. In that fleeting moment, Evelyn realized that her entire existence was on the brink of transformation. Evelyn lingered by the living room window, her eyes drawn to the garden that sprawled behind the house. The soft wind caressed the leaves with a delicate touch, yet within her, a tempest brewed, poised to erupt at any moment. On the patio, Skylar shared a lively laugh with Lucas, their conversation bubbling with energy. Their voices danced through the air, light and carefree, creating an unbreakable bond that seemed impervious to the world's chaos. Evelyn ought to have experienced joy at the sight of her daughter's happiness, yet a persistent ache throbbed within her, an emotion she struggled to identify but could not dismiss. Lucas's silhouette in the garden evoked a piece of her past, drawing Evelyn back to an era when she was vibrant and brimming with hope. In those days, she held the conviction that love and marriage would serve as the foundation of her existence. Yet what she discovered in their place were shattered vows and scars that remained forever unhealed. Evelyn married Richard Parker in her early 20s, a man who seemed charming and refined on the surface, yet concealed a storm of control and oppression beneath his sophisticated facade. In the nascent phase of their union, Richard radiated like the sun, illuminating every dim recess of her heart. Yet that light quickly transformed into an all-consuming inferno that spared nothing in its path. Richard insisted on nothing less than perfection in all aspects of life, from the meals presented at the table to the manner in which Evelyn conducted herself during family gatherings. He incessantly criticized, shaping her into the vision of a wife he believed she ought to be, instead of embracing her for her authentic self. Evelyn had convinced herself that she could withstand it, for the sake of love, for the sake of Skylar. Their baby girl arrived at a time when their marriage was precariously balanced on the brink. Yet, in the end, all came crashing down on a frigid winter afternoon. Evelyn could still recall it with striking clarity. Richard bursting into her studio, his voice raised in anger over a painting she had yet to complete. It wasn't intended for an exhibition or for sale. It was merely a sanctuary for her, a tranquil space where she could remain true to herself. With a swift motion, he tore the painting into fragments, proclaiming its worthlessness before her very gaze. Evelyn held back her tears. Yet in that instant, she understood that she had entirely lost herself within the boundaries of their marriage. A week later, she gathered her belongings, took Skylar by the hand, and departed from the house she had once envisioned as their eternal sanctuary. Life following that moment was far from simple. Evelyn poured her heart and soul into raising her daughter, diligently piecing together a life while finding herself anew through her art. She imparted all her knowledge to Skylar, infusing every lesson with the love she wished to restore in the shattered family they had become. Despite her relentless efforts, an unbridgeable chasm remained between them, a divide that Evelyn could never seem to close. As Skylar matured, an unquenchable thirst for freedom took root within her, accompanied by a growing bitterness towards her mother's overbearing protectiveness. Evelyn was unaware that in her effort to protect Skylar, she had unwittingly imposed upon her the very same pressure that Richard had once exerted on her. With Lucas's arrival, Evelyn felt herself being pulled back into the echoes of her past. Lucas transcended the role of mere friend to Skylar. He embodied all that Evelyn had once yearned for: liberation, empathy, and the profound sensation of being genuinely acknowledged. Yet that epiphany filled her with dread, for Lucas was not merely a reflection of her past suffering. He awakened feelings she had long since locked away. Outside, Lucas's laughter rang out, vibrant and free, a response to something Skylar had shared. Evelyn averted her gaze from the window, yearning to banish the vision of them from her thoughts. Yet the anguish of her history and the chaos of her current reality adhered to her, as relentless and raw as a wound that refused to mend. It hung in the air, a quiet tension brewing just below the surface, poised to explode with the faintest provocation. And now, it was Lucas who meticulously unraveled everything. Slowly, bit by painstaking bit. As darkness enveloped the night, an unsettling stillness descended upon the house. Skylar ventured out to join her friends, leaving Evelyn and Lucas in the vast expanse of the house, where even the faintest noise reverberated endlessly. Evelyn lingered in her studio, the soft illumination of the lamp bathing the incomplete canvas in a warm, golden hue. She endeavored to concentrate, to calm her hand, yet the brush quivered as her mind drifted back to the previous night, to the way Lucas's eyes had held her with an intensity that eluded her understanding. The sudden knock at the door sent a jolt through her, breaking the silence of the room. Evelyn glanced upward, and there stood Lucas, entering the room with unwavering confidence, as if the very space were as much his as it was hers. "I didn't know you worked this late," he said, his voice low and smooth, his eyes narrowing with a curiosity that felt almost too intimate. Evelyn placed the brush aside, striving to keep her voice composed. "I typically engage in that. It aids my concentration." With a faint smile, Lucas stepped deeper into the room, uninvited yet undeterred. He paused before the painting, his gaze following each brushstroke on the incomplete visage. Once more, "It's the eyes," he murmured, as if confiding in his own thoughts rather than addressing her directly. Evelyn's brow furrowed, her pulse racing. "What do you mean?" she inquired, her voice so soft it scarcely disturbed the silence. Lucas turned to her, his smile dissipating, giving way to a gravity that thickened the atmosphere surrounding them. He spoke softly about the eyes in the painting, noting that they were not merely lifelike. It felt as though they could see right through you. Evelyn's throat constricted, a wave of uncertainty washing over her as she grappled with the implications of Lucas's words, which seemed to resonate with a depth beyond their surface meaning. The atmosphere in the room grew dense with silence. Lucas drew a chair closer and settled into it, reclining as if he aimed to prolong the encounter for as long as possible. "Skylar speaks of you often," he said, finally shattering the silence. "Yet you don't entirely match my expectations." Evelyn experienced a subtle unease, yet her curiosity remained undeniable. "And what precisely did you envision?" she inquired, her tone sharp, nearly combative. Lucas arched an eyebrow, as if her question posed a challenge he was ready to confront. "Stronger," he stated with a quiet intensity, yet there was an underlying vulnerability, as if you were concealing something. "Perhaps many things." His words sliced through her like a sharp knife. Evelyn yearned to laugh, to brush him off, to melt away the palpable tension that hung in the air, yet she found herself unable to do so. "You're wrong," she asserted, her tone resolute, yet a subtle tremor in her voice revealed her inner conflict. "I possess no secrets." Lucas fixed his eyes on her, his expression intensifying, yet he remained silent. The stillness that ensued was more disquieting than any utterance he could have made. Outside, the rain intensified, its rhythmic percussion against the roof forming a constant symphony. Lucas stood up from his chair and approached the window, his figure outlined against the darkness of the night. "It's raining," he remarked with a casual air, as though he were reflecting on a matter of greater significance than mere meteorological conditions. Evelyn merely nodded, choosing not to delve deeper into the conversation. She attempted to dismiss the proximity of his being, how his essence appeared to saturate every inch of the space around them. He pivoted towards her, narrowing the space that separated them. "What compels you to consistently distance yourself from others?" he inquired, his tone hushed yet heavy, pushing against her barriers. Evelyn lifted her gaze, locking eyes with him. She found herself at a loss for words, as the question delved into a realm of her being that she had meticulously concealed for years. "I don't," she replied, her voice quivering, the words resonating with emptiness even within her own heart. Lucas leaned in just a bit, his presence now commanding and intense. She sensed his warmth, the distance between them diminishing until it was nearly gone. "Do you truly believe that?" he murmured. In that instant, all else appeared to dissolve into the background. The rain fell softly, the lamplight flickered, and the rest of the world faded away, leaving only the piercing intensity of his gaze. Evelyn sensed an irresistible pull towards him, as if every concealed feeling within her was being mirrored back, unguarded and laid bare. She ought to have risen, ought to have exited the room, ought to have brought this to a close. Yet her body remained still, unyielding. Lucas leaned in, his fingers grazing the table's edge, a quiet yet intentional movement that resonated as an unvoiced beckoning. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat signaling that she stood on the precipice of a choice from which there would be no turning back. "Lucas," she began, but before she could continue, his hand enveloped hers. The caress was delicate, almost ethereal, yet it ignited a spark within her, as though an invisible force had surged between them. The feelings she had fought to contain erupted, relentless and overwhelming. Before she had a chance to process, Lucas leaned in, his breath a warm whisper against her cheek. And then it unfolded. His lips brushed against hers, gentle yet fervent, drawing her into a whirlwind of guilt and longing she had long suppressed. The room descended into a hush, punctuated solely by the rhythmic patter of rain against the window. Evelyn was acutely aware of the wrongness of her actions, a persistent voice urging her to put an end to it all. Yet she chose not to. She was unable to do so. In that moment, the loneliness that had enveloped her for so long discovered an unexpected solace. And yet, beneath the surface, she understood that this marked the onset of a rift that could never be repaired. Skylar entered the house, the door crashing shut behind her, its echo resonating through the still corridors. Outside, the rain fell in relentless sheets, droplets adorning her golden hair and glistening beneath the inviting warmth of the living room lights. Yet Skylar remained unfazed by the rain or her drenched attire. She remained still, her keen gaze sweeping the surroundings, as an unfamiliar weight settled in her chest. An unsettling awareness lingered, an unarticulated tension that hung heavily in the atmosphere. A soft chuckle resonated from the distant end of the hallway, drawing Skylar back from her reverie. She glided swiftly, her wet shoes whispering against the wooden floor. As she approached the studio door, a sudden stillness enveloped her. Her hand tightened around the doorknob, and her heart tightened at the sound of Lucas's voice. Low, almost intimate, drifting through the silence with an ease that sent shivers down her spine. "You know, Evelyn," he murmured. This transcends mere moments." Skylar gently nudged the door ajar. She remained there, frozen in position as though transformed into marble. Before her, Evelyn and Lucas shared an intimacy that resonated more profoundly than any spoken language ever could. Evelyn spun around, her eyes brimming with terror, ensnared as if a criminal caught red-handed. Lucas stayed rooted in place, taking just one deliberate step back, his face a mask of inscrutability, devoid of any hint of remorse. "What is happening?" Skylar's voice, though not raised, quivered with a mix of fury and pain, cutting through the air with the precision of a blade. Evelyn felt the weight of the question land heavily upon her, rendering her momentarily speechless. Evelyn instinctively stepped back, her eyes falling to the floor as if it contained the answer she was unable to conjure. Her silence merely stoked the flames of Skylar's escalating fury. "Mom," Skylar repeated, her voice rising, cracking under the weight of her emotion as tears began to pool in her eyes. Answer me. Evelyn parted her lips, yet the words remained ensnared in her throat, entwined with guilt and shame. Yet, Lucas interjected, his voice disconcertingly composed. Skylar, refrain from placing blame on your mother. This is not as it appears. Skylar released a laugh that was both bitter and hollow. Not what I think, she remarked, her tone dripping with sarcasm and incredulity. Her intense gaze locked onto Lucas. Your words seem to lack understanding. What activities did the two of you engage in? Simply share with me what transpired. Her final words burst forth like a pointed finger, fracturing the tense stillness that enveloped the room. Evelyn finally raised her head, her tear-stained visage betraying a sorrow she could no longer conceal. Yet, she remained silent. In her silence, Skylar discovered the affirmation she sought. It's true, Skylar whispered, her voice barely audible, as if she were reluctant to accept the reality of her own confession. You have both betrayed me. Skylar, it's not what you think, Evelyn finally uttered, though her voice faltered, devoid of certainty. She advanced cautiously toward her daughter, her hands quivering as she extended them, only to halt in uncertainty. This outcome was never my intention. It simply occurred. It simply occurred. Skylar stepped back, her eyes aflame with intensity. Is this a joke? What could that possibly signify? Are you implying that you inadvertently allowed the man I cherish to make contact with you? Is that truly what you're conveying to me? Her voice shattered, each word piercing through Evelyn like fragments of glass. Lucas approached Skylar, his face etched with regret, yet she raised a hand to halt his advance. Don't, Lucas, she said, her voice cutting through the air. Silence is golden. He stood still, his expression hardening as the burden of her anguish and fury pressed heavily upon him. He appeared utterly lost, yet Skylar remained indifferent. She found herself devoid of any space for pity. You always said you loved me, Skylar murmured, her voice quaking with a deep-seated pain as she faced Evelyn. You consistently urged me to embrace honesty, to honor my own worth, and to cherish what truly mattered. And now behold your transformation. Behold the fruits of your labor. Everything has been laid to waste. My life, my family. Furthermore, her voice shattered entirely as she faced Lucas again, her eyes overflowing with tears. And you, Lucas. You claimed to have feelings for me. You vowed you would never cause me pain. And now, here we are. The atmosphere thickened with an oppressive stillness. Evelyn was engulfed by a suffocating sensation, as if the very fabric of her reality had crumbled into dust in that fleeting instant. Skylar's gaze lingered on both of them, her eyes brimming with a tumult of heartbreak and fury. At last, she pivoted and marched away, her footsteps echoing through the corridor before the front door crashed shut, reverberating with a power that felt as though it could rattle the very foundations of the house. Evelyn remained motionless, her hands tightly bound in a clenched grip. Lucas gazed at her, yet she turned away, unable to confront the unfiltered remorse she anticipated in his eyes. Evelyn, he murmured, his voice laced with a hint of regret. Yet she shook her head, her voice faltering beneath the burden of her sorrow. Lucas, your presence is no longer welcome here. He remained silent. He paused, his gaze fixed on her, as if etching her features into his memory for eternity. With no further words exchanged, he pivoted and exited, leaving Evelyn solitary in the studio. The rain outside drummed on with an unyielding cadence, yet within, the silence morphed into a tempest that raged in Evelyn's thoughts. She collapsed into the nearest chair, her body quaking, her universe shattered. The following morning, the sky wore a muted gray hue, while the rain persisted in its unyielding cadence, tapping gently against the windows. Evelyn lingered in her studio, the expansive window framing her view of the garden beyond, her eyes drawn to its vibrant allure. The trees bowed beneath the burden of the frigid breeze, their limbs undulating like tired guardians. Within the confines of the room, silence enveloped Evelyn like a thick fog, allowing her to perceive the relentless ticking of the war clock. A sound so unwavering it mirrored the profound emptiness she harbored within. Skylar was yet to return home. Silence reigned, devoid of calls or messages. Evelyn remained awake throughout the night, attuned to every sound, every hint that the front door might creak open, heralding the return of her daughter. Yet, what remained was nothing but silence. Lucas had vanished as well. He departed the house soon after the confrontation of the previous night, his exit deliberate and hushed, as if he sought to minimize the remnants of his presence. Yet, his absence created an immense chasm, so profound that Evelyn sensed the very walls of the house closing in around her, stifling her breath and spirit from within. She had committed errors, grave, unfixable errors, and now the repercussions loomed around her like shadows from which she could not flee. With the soft glow of dawn seeping through the window, Evelyn rose at last. Her footsteps weighted as she traversed toward the living room. On the coffee table rested an envelope, its presence undeniable. The script upon it bore Skylar's unmistakable touch, a familiarity that tightened Evelyn's heart with an ache. With trembling hands, she lifted the letter, her fingers wavering as she began to unfold it. The words on the page struck her with a relentless force, each one a sharp, piercing blow, an indescribable pain that resonated deep within her. Mother, I require some time. You've often expressed your affection for me, yet love must transcend mere words. Every time I see you and Lucas together, a sense of betrayal washes over me. You have stripped away the very essence of what I held dear, my trust. Now, I find myself at a loss, uncertain of how to reclaim what was once mine. I am uncertain if I will ever be able to. I must take my leave. Yet, despite everything, my feelings towards you are not filled with hate. All I require is some space. I hold on to the hope that when I come back, we might discover a path to begin anew. Skylar. The letter fell from Evelyn's grasp, her body collapsing into the nearest chair, tears cascading down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she grasped the piece of paper, as though it were the last remnant of Skylar in her existence. How could she hold her daughter accountable? What else could she possibly anticipate? Evelyn realized that the situation had spiraled beyond control, and she understood that it was her actions that had driven Skylar away. The subsequent days were engulfed in an eerie silence. Evelyn endeavored to immerse herself in her work, in the canvases that had once offered her refuge, yet nothing could bridge the chasm that Skylar had created. In her studio, she lingered for hours, gazing vacantly at the incomplete canvases, her brush frequently resting idle. Lucas had vanished, leaving no indication that he would ever come back. Evelyn contemplated reaching out to him, yearning for some semblance of explanation or closure, yet ultimately, she recognized that it was inconsequential. Lucas was a misstep, a fleeting lapse in judgment that would forever etch itself into her memory as a lasting reminder of her vulnerability. On a morning, several weeks after the chaos had unfolded, A letter made its way to me. This time, the message came not from Skylar, but from Lucas. Evelyn opened the envelope, her heart fluttering with a feeling she struggled to identify. The letter began with the name, Evelyn. I apologize. Not for my actions, but for the way I complicated everything. The hurt I've inflicted upon you is unwarranted, and I find myself unworthy of a role in your existence. I shall not return, not out of a lack of desire, but rather from the understanding that my presence would only exacerbate the situation. Look after Skylar. She requires your presence more than anyone else ever could. As her mother, your unwavering love will be the balm that mends all wounds. Evelyn set the letter aside, a heaviness settling in her chest, yet a delicate strand of relief began to weave through her grief. Lucas had vanished, and so had Skylar. Yet Evelyn found herself with time, a precious opportunity to heal the wound she had inflicted, a chance to set things aright. As the months slipped by, winter descended, cloaking the landscape in a serene layer of snow. Evelyn lingered in her studio, her gaze fixed upon the latest painting she had completed. The portrait of Skylar captured her radiant eyes, which gazed from the canvas, embodying both warmth and an unspoken distance. Evelyn remained uncertain about her daughter's return, yet she resolved to wait patiently. She would bide her time until Skylar was prepared to forgive, until she discovered the inner strength to genuinely seek atonement. Outside, the snow descended gracefully, enveloping the garden in a flawless layer of white. Evelyn shut her eyes, inhaling deeply. Her existence had transformed irrevocably, fractured in manner she had never envisioned. Yet she persisted, for love never truly diminishes. Time is all it needs to navigate its path back home.